You want to write a fantasy novel. Of course you do. That's why you watched last week's video about building a real work ethic. Now it's time to talk about the second discipline, learning how to read like a writer. Now I know what you're thinking.
I already know how to read, James.
I thought the same thing, until I went to college and I realized I had no idea how to read in a way that actually expanded my thinking or helped me to sharpen my craft. For those of you who are new here, I'm James, an author, editor, and the owner of The Arcanist, an independent publisher dedicated to sharing excellent fantasy fiction. For the first time in human history, there are more people trying to publish books than people who are willing to read them. Most writers will have 3 readers: their mom, their partner, and their editor. And that's not an accident. Many beginning writers are so eager to write that they neglect the one habit that makes writing matter in the first place: reading. Writing and reading are not separate pursuits. They are 2 halves of the same discipline. Not every reader wants to be a writer, but every writer needs to be an avid reader. It's non-negotiable. So when I say learn how to read, I don't mean literacy. I don't mean reading for comfort alone. I mean taking ownership over what you read, choosing books deliberately, reading with intention, treating every book as an opportunity to expand your understanding of story, language, and meaning. As writers, every life experience is a point of research. And once you understand that, every book you pick up becomes one too. Learning to read critically is not a skill that I can teach you in a 10-minute YouTube video. What I can do is give you a set of principles that will get you started and help to dismantle some common misconceptions about what good reading looks like. Reading slowly is actually a good thing. Many of us were taught to read the wrong way. Schools often prioritize reading fast over reading well, and how many of us learned to hate reading through elementary and high school? Me too. But it doesn't matter how many books you finish in a year, or how many points you get from the quizzes. Oh my god, can you believe that we did that? I almost didn't graduate the 8th grade because I didn't acquire enough reading points. What matters is whether you're absorbing, questioning, and reflecting on what you read. This applies to everything: pulp fantasy, literary classics, or dense philosophy. Speed is irrelevant. Comprehension is everything. Read every day, even if it's only a little. If you followed my advice from my previous video, then you are already waking up a half hour early. Go ahead and push back another half hour. Spend 20 to 30 minutes reading with coffee and breakfast before you start writing. If you can carry around a Kindle or a pocket-sized book, bring it with you and read a page or 2 anytime there's a free moment that you'd usually be tempted to look at your phone. Go ahead and read on the toilet. It's okay. Read multiple books across different genres and different formats. I usually read one major fantasy title as an audiobook, paired with 1 or 2 shorter books in print or on my e-reader. Sometimes those are fantasy, but more often they're nonfiction. But lately, I've been enjoying fantasy in print and nonfiction in audio. This matters because it trains your brain to compartmentalize different texts and narrative modes. Over time, this strengthens your ability to shift between projects, a skill that will become essential later in your writing career, especially if you adopt the rotational workflow that I talked about last week. Take notes on what you read. Keep a journal or a digital note system to record quotes, observations, and short reflections. Writing 1-paragraph summaries in your own words is an excellent way to solidify understanding and expose gaps in comprehension. When you encounter a new word, stop. Look it up. Write it down. Keep a running vocabulary list that you can easily refer to. This habit alone compounds faster than almost anything else you can do as a writer, so long as you're reading stuff that actually challenges you. As you read, pay attention to how experienced writers communicate their ideas. Notice recurring turns of phrase. Notice how they manage clarity, momentum, and emphasis. Many things that feel difficult to articulate as a new writer become obvious once you've seen them handled well on the page. For example, the split infinitive. In speech, we often place the verb at the end of a phrase. In prose, that habit can make sentences feel sluggish, especially when description intervenes. Awkward. She flung the door open. Stronger. She flung open the door. The difference becomes clearer when we sprinkle in description. Very awkward. She flung the orange ornate door that was made in Alaska open. Stronger. She flung open the orange ornate door that was made in Alaska. This is a lesson I learned much too late into my writing career, and I learned it by paying attention to good writing. This is what reading critically looks like in practice. Fantasy is a complex genre that demands both imagination and deep understanding of its underlying influences. Ideas alone are not enough. Ideas are cheap. You're going to have ideas up the wazoo, and any good writer can make a bad idea into a good story. Chances are you already have more ideas than you know what to do with. But if you are writing solely from a generalized secondhand understanding of fantasy, the result will feel shallow and underdeveloped, no matter how compelling the premise. I've used the metaphor of taking a photocopy of a photocopy. Every time you copy a copy, the subsequent copy fades more than the original. I have said before that reading outside the genre is not just useful, but often more important than reading fantasy itself. Most fantasy is set within a pseudo-European medieval setting. A lot of fantasy takes place in a mythic, magical reimagining of some point in history. If that is the tradition you want to work within, you would be far better served by studying a specific region and a historical period directly. Its customs, religions, politics, trade networks, social structures, rather than relying on the genre's collective shorthand. The more concrete and specific your source material becomes, the more authentic your fantasy will feel. Depth comes from detail, and detail comes from research that reaches beyond the boundary of the genre. I also highly recommend becoming familiar with classical nonfiction and mythology associated with the subject matter of your interest. Such works will help you understand how people of the past spoke and thought about the world around them. Now that I've given you a framework for improving how you read, let's talk about what you should be reading. Exactly which books you choose will depend on your tastes and long-term goals, but there are several broad categories that every fantasy writer should intentionally engage with. Reading will not magically make you a deep writer, however, expanding your knowledge will deepen your understanding of the world, and that intrinsic understanding inevitably shows up on the page.
Classic fantasy.
Familiarize yourself with the foundations of the genre. I am tempted to list The Lord of the Rings as required reading. You would be surprised how many people haven't actually read it. But classic fantasy extends well beyond Tolkien. Sword and sorcery, pre-Tolkien fantasy, and early 20th century writers like Lord Dunsany are all worth your time. As a general rule, anything published before 1960 is fair game. Understanding the classics allows you to see why modern fantasy looks the way that it does. From there, you can make informed decisions about which tropes to embrace and which to avoid.
Modern fantasy.
Choose at least one long-running series you want to study deeply, preferably one that aligns with the kind of work you hope to create. For me, Steven Erikson's and Ian C. Esselmont's Malazan series, along with its many spin-offs, have been a lifelong source of study. Do not just skim these books, live in them. Pay attention to the structure, the pacing, points of view, and how the world reveals itself over time.
Nature writing.
My favorite nonfiction to recommend is nature writing. Quests and adventures are central to fantasy. And where do these journals often take place?
In the wilderness.
Reading how real-world writers observe and describe nature will directly influence how your characters experience your fantasy world. A great place to start is Globetrotting, Writers Walk the World, edited by Duncan Minshall. It's a short book that offers a wide variety of authors, eras, and regions, giving you a rich palette of perspectives to draw from. A bonus read, if you can find it, is The Tough Guide to Fantasyland by Diana Wynne Jones. This is your guide to eliminating out-of-place junk in your fantasy, such as cooking stew on the road. That's a cumbersome meal, and travelers are more likely to pan-sear a cut of salted meat.
Mythology.
Select one or more mythological traditions you want to draw from, and read both primary stories and modern analysis. Always read from multiple sources. As an example, I'm currently researching Viking culture for a work in progress. Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology served as a solid primer. Help me understand the narrative framework of the myths before diving into more academic material. I also believe everyone should read the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are, in many ways, the earliest epic fantasies ever composed.
History!
Pick a specific region and time period you want to adapt into your fantasy and study it closely. Surface-level familiarity is not enough. Neil Price's Children of Ash and Elm is an excellent, if occasionally biased, overview of the Scandinavian history and culture. What makes books like this invaluable are the details: foods, hairstyles, trade goods, daily routines. These are the elements that make fantasy worlds feel lived in.
Psychology!
I completed a minor in psychology during my undergraduate studies, specifically to better understand how people think. That knowledge does not translate into my writing in obvious ways, but it has profoundly shaped how I build characters. Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind is particularly useful for writing characters who occupy opposing moral positions while sincerely believing that they're correct. This is essential if you want believable conflict.
Philosophy!
Much of the most compelling fantasy is philosophical at its core. Understanding how thinkers have wrestled with concepts like good and evil and duty adds depth to even the most familiar fantasy conflicts. For example, The Lord of the Rings takes on a new meaning when viewed through Tolkien's conception of evil as inherently empty. Sauron is the big bad, yet he's largely present. The Balrog itself is made out of shadow and fire, destruction without substance. One of my favorite works in this category is Life and Fate by Vasily Grossman. While it is a novel, it is so dense with philosophical insight that even reading selected passages alongside scholarly analysis can be immensely valuable.
Literary fiction!
If you want to write character-driven fantasy, literary fiction is not an option. It's essential. This is where you learn how to move beyond plot and spectacle and into the deeper texture of human experience. I recommend the Norton Anthology of American Literature, 1914 to 1945, and a recent edition of the Best American Short Stories. These collections also demonstrate the power of short fiction, which we will discuss more in the next video. You may have noticed that I have not recommended any books that teach you how to write. That was intentional. At this stage, you're not learning how to write yet. You're learning how to read. Right now, your task is simpler and more important. Decide what you are going to read. Create a reading list that will carry you through the next 3 months. Wake up in the morning and read. Make reading not just a habit, but something you genuinely look forward to. After you read, write. Write anything. Summarize what you read. Analyze its narrative structure. Take note of interesting literary or narrative devices. Write a short story inspired by a book you love. Respond to what you read in your own words, and that's the most important thing. What matters is not quality or polish. What matters is that reading and writing become a daily, non-negotiable part of your life. Once that foundation is in place, everything else becomes possible. So, did I miss anything? Are there any other types of books that new and experienced fantasy writers should be reading? Let us know down in the comments. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep reading!